Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Having a pool in my backyard has always been a dream of mine. I worked hard to be able to afford a house with enough property to install one. The day it was finally finished was one of the happiest of my life. I could relax with my family and friends without needing to fight crowds at public pools. That dream turned into a nightmare when a new neighbor moved in next door. Her name was Karen, and she was the epitome of someone bearing that moniker. The entitlement jumped out immediately when she came over to introduce herself. Her smile dropped when she saw the pool in my yard. I could tell she was scheming something, but brushed it off as me just being paranoid. A week later, she was knocking at my door again, asking to use my pool whenever she wanted. I politely declined and explained it was for personal use only. She huffed and said she would be back. I assumed that would be the end of it, but Karen was not one to give up so easily. The very next day, she was back demanding access to my pool again. She claimed it wasn't fair that I had one when she didn't. I stood firm and said it was on my property that I paid for, and wasn't any of her business. She threatened me that if I didn't share, she would make sure I lost the pool altogether. Karen stormed off in a rage before I could even respond. Her threat worried me enough to immediately install security cameras in case she tried anything funny. It turned out to be a smart decision when just 2 days later, I checked the footage to see Karen sneaking into my backyard in the middle of the night. She tried to damage and vandalize my pool, but luckily didn't manage to do any real harm before I chased her off. The next day, I went straight to her house and told Karen if she ever stepped foot on my property again, I would call the police. She slammed the door in my face. I thought about getting a restraining order, but figured the threat of cops would be enough for now. I kept reviewing the camera footage anxiously for the next few days until she made her next move. As I was eating dinner one night, my phone alerted me to motion in the backyard. I rushed to check the live feed and saw Karen out by my pool again. This time she had a hose and was actively trying to drain all the water out. I ran outside and yelled at her to stop. We got into a shouting match, but I managed to wrestle the hose away from her. I told Karen this was her last warning and that I would be calling the cops. She screamed that she was going to take my pool no matter what. I had finally had enough of her insane behavior. Once back inside, I immediately called the police to report Karen for trespassing and attempted property damage. They arrived in record time, and I showed them the video footage as evidence. Karen was still lurking in my yard when the cops rolled up. And she tried telling them that she was allowed to be there, and that the pool rightfully belonged to her. The police were not even slightly convinced, and warned her to stay away from my property. Karen argued back, so they went ahead and arrested her for trespassing and attempted vandalism. I happily pressed charges, and her entitled behavior continued straight into the courtroom. She kept insisting the pool was hers and that I had stolen it from her. The judge was completely dumbfounded and told her that was not at all how property ownership worked. Karen ended up with a slap on the wrist by only getting some probation and a fine. She came back to my house one more time to yell that she would find a way to take her pool. I reminded her that if she set foot on my property again, she would be going straight to jail. Having finally had enough of her ridiculous demands and threats, I went ahead and filed a restraining order against her. The judge happily approved it given the evidence against Karen. She was absolutely furious when she found out. Karen stood on the sidewalk and screamed at me but couldn't step any closer without violating the order. For a couple months, everything was blissfully quiet without having to deal with her. Then one day I came home to find police swarming my backyard. Apparently Karen had tried yet again to get to my pool while I was gone. A neighbor saw her hop my fence and called the cops. Thanks to the restraining order, they were able to arrest her once more. She was still ranting about how the pool was rightfully hers. At her court date, Karen got slapped with some real jail time for repeatedly violating the order. During her sentencing, she made a scene and tried to attack me in the courthouse. The bailiff restrained her, and she was dragged away kicking and screaming. I slept easy that night, knowing Karen was finally behind bars and away from me and my pool. The police told me if she bothered me again once released from jail to not hesitate in calling them. Thankfully, after that lengthy sentence, her desire for my pool seemed to have dissipated. She avoided eye contact if we ever crossed paths in the neighborhood. While it took some work, I successfully protected my precious pool from my unhinged neighbor. I learned to never underestimate how far a Karen will go once they set their sights on something. After my experience, I make sure to be wary of any new neighbors. At least now I can swim in peace without worrying about any more pool heists. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I used to have a Veterans Disability Pension, VDP, for a hearing defect. It's now merged with my state pension. It was small and back home was paid annually. However, I moved to the UK and this pension was still paid by my government, but now administered by the UK DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, who paid it fortnightly. Some years ago, I was entitled to a disability allowance, DA, because of various issues. At the time, I was diagnosed with diabetes but was trying to control it with diet, so I got called into the local job center for an interview. Unfortunately, I had a Karen for an interviewer. I'm on the spectrum, but I'm high functioning. This means that I don't suffer fools gladly, and I can be very rules-bound. Firstly, she questions why I hadn't declared the VDP as part of my earnings. I had, but it was in another part of the form. Then she said that I couldn't have diabetes because I wasn't taking any medicine, and as I was telling Porky, she would not allow my claim. Now, the DA claim had nothing to do with my diabetes. However, she was stupid to put in her letter of rejection that I hadn't diabetes because I wasn't taking any medicine for it. She also said that they would no longer pay my VDP. I sent a copy of the letter to my High Commission, who said don't worry, they would deal with it. I handed a copy of the letter to my doctor, who was incensed. She complained to the DWP asking about Karen's medical qualifications. So I got asked to have another interview about 1 p.m. on a certain day with the Karen. I said that I couldn't guarantee to attend on that day as I had another appointment that morning. The message back from the Karen was, if I didn't attend, my claim would be refused. So going with the flow, I said that I would try to attend, but I might be a little late. So I have my morning appointment, go home, change, and toddle off to the job center. I get there on the dot of 1 p.m. only to find that the Karen had booked an interview room on the first floor instead of the ground floor. There is no lift. To cut a long story short, it took me nearly 15 minutes to haul my sorry ass up those stairs in the end, being helped by this guy in a suit who asked why I was trying to get to the first floor. I told him that I had an interview and that the Karen who was seeing me chose the room. So I get to the room and Karen says, "You are late, I am refusing your claim unless you have a very good reason." So I said to her, "Well, my day has been interesting. You were warned that I had an appointment this morning and because of it I might be late." Karen, I want you to tell me about this appointment and exactly what happened to make you late. Me. I turned up at the appointment this morning, took my clothes off, and then had 2 nice young ladies slather my meat and 2 veg with lube. They then proceeded to do things to said meat and 2 veg. They then got me to lie down on my side facing the wall, and one of them proceeded to stick her fingers up my ass. Karen, how dare you talk such filth in front of me? Your case is closed. Suit, who was listening out of sight. Excuse me, Karen, but you did ask him to tell you about his appointment and exactly what happened to make him late. Suit to me. How did your prostate examination go? Me. More tests, unfortunately. Suit. And was that the reason you were late? Me. No, the stupid idiot was being vindictive and interviewed me on this floor instead of the ground floor. She knew my claim was because I had breathing problems and couldn't climb stairs. I think she would have claimed that as I made it to the first floor, I was lying and refused the claim. Suit. I think you are right. Suit to Karen. You will approve his DLA claim as I had to help him up the stairs, and based on my observations he qualifies. And you and your manager will report to me tomorrow at 9 a.m. in my office to explain your actions. If you are late, you will be terminated. Karen, very white-faced. Yes, sir. Turns out he was an area director that the DWP had sent in to investigate the high level of complaints about that job center. It also turns out that a complaint from a high commissioner about a breaching an international agreement is a big deal for the DWP. Who knew? The next one is a petty revenge story. A few years back, I was at Disney World with some friends. Disney had just opened up Pandora, the world of Avatar. Needless to say, the line for the flight of passage was insanely long and looped throughout the park. We get in line and wait about 2.5 hours. While we're standing there and chatting, this Karen sneaks in with her husband and 2 kids immediately in front of us. Her kids point out to her that this is not the beginning of the line. She immediately shushes them and tells them that it's okay to cut the line because they have a flight to catch. The husband doesn't say a word. My friends were about to say something, but I immediately stop them. My friends look at me confused, to which I whisper, "Just watch and learn." We stand in line for about 45 more minutes until we're right at the entrance. That's when I decide to walk up to a security guard and tell him that this lady cut us in line and refused to go back to the end. I told him that I didn't want to cause a ruckus, so I waited until I found him so he can talk to her. Sure enough, the guard walks up to her and says that she cut the line. She freaks out on him and says that she didn't, and that she's been standing in line for a while. He proceeds to ask her how long she has been waiting, and she says over an hour, to which he replies the wait for this ride is at least 3 hours, so you must have cut in. She was puzzled and frustrated, but realized she got caught, so she finally stops yelling and agrees to leave. As they escort her and her family out of the line, I look at her and say with a nice smile on my face, "Have a safe flight." Then I look at my friends and tell them, "And that's how it's done, boys." We still laugh about it once in a while. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In March, I knew hard times were coming for everyone, so I voluntarily moved all of my music students online, offering pay what you can afford, effective immediately. Lessons are paid in advance per month. The only condition, if you are experiencing financial distress as a result of COVID, please only pay what you can afford. No minimum, no questions asked. 1 week later, the essential services shutdown became mandatory anyway, as it turns out. I retained 100% of my students, with only 3 people taking me up on my offer. I was totally stoked. I was overjoyed to help out my music community because I didn't want their education to suffer. Also, I refused to let the virus for anyone to cease their musical journey. Looking back years later on and thinking, I know exactly the moment when I stopped playing music, and that was because of the virus. Lastly, also because when I was a young musician, my teacher generously offered me a similar deal, and now it was up to me to pass it forward, and this is an honor. Enter Karen, actual name, to provide some character reference. Pre-COVID, when she'd enrolled, I'd made an exception to open up a slot for her during morning hours. I only teach nights. She then wanted to come in sometime between 12:03 p.m. Having been told to just choose a single 30-minute time slot, she arrived early anyway. I'd text her and say, "I see you've arrived, but I'm in the middle of something right now. I'll be out at correct time, thanks." We kept this up until she started coming in on time. Another time, she requested that I give her another student's spot after their school holidays. I politely declined, saying that would be not only unfair but completely heartbreaking to one of my students. She compromised with, "Well, then how about after the summer holidays?" That's Christmas in Australia where I am. Also, she would regularly talk to me about the expensive hotels she and her family would stay in while overseas, as well as the new house renovations they were currently having. These points became relevant because, when I announced to move online, pay what you can afford. She is the only person who hits me back with, "So we keep attending face-to-face this month?" I said no, it's effective immediately. She said, "But this month the fees are still the same?" I replied, "I'd be happy to return March's remaining fees. Just send me your details and I'll handle it immediately." Within the hour, I'd refunded her the full amount with the following text. "Hi Karen, your March fees are refunded. Thank you for your custom and please consider your daughter's lessons discontinued. I regret that I'm simply not in a financial position to offer a pay what you can afford system to my students, while also refunding past payments, as that would put me out of business immediately. However, that refund was your preference and I wish to respect your request. I wish you, your daughter and your family all the best at this difficult time. Take care." I said goodbye and felt great. Her daughter will be fine. There's heaps of great teachers in my area. Just might be hard to find someone good who offers pay what you can afford in a time of crisis. Good riddance. The next one is an entitled people story. It's been a while since the whole incident with my entitled neighbor Elaine. I've gotten to know 3 of my neighbors so far, and I didn't mention the Elaine incident to them because I felt like it wasn't my place to defame someone. My immediate next-door neighbors, let's call them John and Carol, had a small BBQ and potluck. They invited other neighbors, and I talked to many of them and started to get to know them. Overall, everyone was very friendly. Towards the end of the BBQ, Elaine came around knocking at the backyard gate with a bag of containers. She said she rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Carol went towards the gate, but John told her to sit down and got an angry look. He asked her if she needed anything. She said she wants to join the party and everything smells really good. John said this party is potluck and it's nearly over, and about all the food is finished. Elaine asked if she could come in anyway. Carol chirped up and asked if she brought anything. Elaine said she didn't, but she's sure there's more than enough. John said it's nearly over and they're cleaning up now and she should go home. Elaine scowled and tried to open the gate while John firmly held it in place. After a few minutes of that, she went home. I asked Carol what that was all about. Carol says Elaine always invites herself into people's homes with some kind of sob story or just wanting to be welcomed. She eats everything she can find and takes a lot of stuff home. She goes through the fridge and pantries. Even if you tell her no for something, she gets really upset. Carol says she doesn't want to be rude to Elaine, but with the cost of food and caring for children, it's ridiculous that an adult woman feels entitled to pantry and kitchen raiding on a regular basis. A neighbor named Jane said that Elaine insults people a lot casually, and she also invites herself to couples dates nights. Jane claims Elaine called her home inappropriate and psychotic for being too clean. A neighbor named Mary said Elaine called her 15-year-old daughter anorexic for being thinner than her specifically. The neighbors mostly agreed that Elaine is really loud and rude. She doesn't have the best social skills. Most of the neighbors don't talk to her or avoid her. Elaine also never lets anyone in her home. She says it's because of COVID. She doesn't ever bring anything to neighborhood events or anyone's homes and constantly complains about being poor, even though she owns her home. It's usually the husbands that have to be stern and tell her to get out and never come back when Elaine throws her tantrums. I think the husbands are tired of subsidizing her life. The husbands all complained that Elaine really tries hard to talk about her bisexuality with them and cozies up to them. I didn't share my experience with the neighbors for now, but maybe one day I will. I don't feel bad for her. I just feel that she should be kinder to people and not treat them like they exist for her convenience. She isn't entitled to other people's things. She isn't poor. She isn't struggling. Maybe we should have a conversation with her husband. What kind of person shows up to other people's homes with containers? The next one is an entitled Parent Story. So, backstory. My mom and dad split up when I was roughly 9/10 years old due to my mother cheating on my father when he was out of the country. He's a pilot. At the time, it was me and my two older sisters, one of which was already an adult, so my other sister and I were left under my mother's custody due to my father always flying and not wanting us to go through moving all the time. As far as the details go, my dad not only paid my mom child support, but also paid off the house. Despite having little money to take care of himself, he paid my mom more than what he actually owed. Yet my sister and I never saw that money. After the divorce, my mom turned to many things: sleeping around, gambling, drinking, and eventually meth, though that didn't last long due to my dad finding out and threatening to take us away. My sister practically became my mother since ours decided to step down from the plate, and I was too young to take care of myself. When my sister left for college, all the emotional abuse she took ended up falling on me, which sent me into a loop. Due to my sister taking all the damage, I typically saw my mother as well. My mother. My young brain didn't notice how often she didn't come home at night, or the lack of food in the house, or the constant weeks I'd wear one outfit since I didn't have other clothes that fit. I didn't notice how not normal this is. Heading into high school, it became more and more obvious this wasn't right at all, yet I still loved my mother. We bantered and ate fast food together, and she was proud of my accomplishments. But she had her moments, dropping huge hints that I'm too boyish like my dad, refusing to let me cut my hair, pressuring me into wearing makeup, heels, dresses, convincing me I don't need therapy as my therapist at the time made me uncomfortable. One of those Christian therapists that made everything about God. While I am a Christian, it didn't help the conversation. And so on. Meanwhile, my dad met a woman and they fell in love. When she became pregnant with his kid, he moved her to America after my little sister was born and started a new family. I love my stepmom. She's literally the sweetest woman I know, and I adore my baby sister, and eventually my second baby sister. Over time, after spending many nights in their home, I came to realize how much happier I was at their house over my mother's. One day, I told my dad I want to officially live with him. At this point in time, I've noticed how depressed I am and how things aren't normal in my mom's house. When I told my mother this, she was deeply upset and cried, but she understood, or so I thought. That's when everything went downhill. The text messages started. Sly guilt trips and remarks on how someone else convinced me to move out, that my father convinced me she was the bad guy. The more these texts happened, the warier I became on talking to her. It got to the point where I would cry after every conversation because I was so confused and lost. One day, she practically trapped me in her car in my best friend's driveway to tell me how my reasons for leaving her were bullcrap, and that I clearly don't remember what it was like in that house. Cue my memory issues. But enough about that. Let's get to the good part, the custody case. Due to me being the last child between my mother and father, my dad no longer had to pay child support. Obviously, they go to court about this, except my mom didn't show up, for many, many hearings. When she did, she had this bullcrap story about how my dad owed her a crap load of money because he never paid the full child support. How she felt pressured to believe him and trust him when he said he knew how much he owed her. He did. He calculated it himself, and actually paid more than what was needed. So, if you're catching on, this fight was about money. Here's a fun little thing. My mom texted me maybe a month before this case started about how she desperately wants me to come home, how she will do anything to get her baby back. That aged well, didn't it? Because one day my mom stated that if my dad pays her $2,500, she will give up full custody of me. My dad agreed to it and it was over. She gave up her custody rights for $2,500. It still stings. I'm still bitter and angry to this day about it, and this case happened years ago. I don't think my mom is aware I know the details on this case, as she, very rarely, reaches out to me as if we still have a relationship to tell me how much she loves and misses me. The thing is, I learned that my mom actually despised me after the divorce because I reminded her of my dad. We have the same eyes and resting face, lol. My mom just loves being the victim and even tried to convince my sister she doesn't remember doing all the stuff she did to us. She even blamed my dad for her cheating on him and said so to my face. I haven't had a real conversation with her since Christmas, over the phone OFC, and haven't seen her in person since maybe before the pandemic. She texted me recently, all excited about a gift she got for my sister's unborn baby, and it sent a whole new wave of resentment towards her. I stopped trying long ago to have a relationship with her as she doesn't try in return, and will continue to do so until she admits her wrongs, apologizes, and actually tries to be a ducking mother for once in her life. Until then, my only mother is my lovely stepmom. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.